On a cold November night in 1980, a mystery began to unfold in the vast and stark landscape of Sweetwater County, Wyoming, one that would linger unanswered for over 4 decades. David Richard Williams, a 33-year-old trucker known for his dependability, vanished without a trace. His disappearance remains one of Wyoming's most perplexing cold cases, shadowed by the endless expanse of desert and oil fields that defined his last known movements. David wasn't just any man in Sweetwater County. He was the owner and operator of Chances Are Trucking, a business deeply intertwined with the region's oil industry. His work routinely took him across the rugged terrain, hauling supplies to and inspecting oil rigs scattered across the landscape. On November 11, 1980, this routine took a sinister turn. That day, David was last definitively seen around 5:30 p.m. at the venerable old service station and bar in Creston Junction, a remote outpost nestled along Wyoming Highway 789. It was here he made a phone call to his wife, a terse and practical call informing her he would be late because he was heading south to inspect an oil rig. This phone call was the last known communication from David Williams. From this point, he stepped into the cold night not as the driver of his own vehicle, but as a passenger. Witnesses saw him leave in a brown or tan Chevrolet Blazer, driven by an unidentified white male. This detail is crucial. It marked the earliest sign that this disappearance was no ordinary missing persons case, but one woven tightly with unknown third-party involvement. The vehicle headed south, disappearing into the towering Wyoming night, leaving David's fate an open question. David himself was a striking figure, standing between 6'2" and 6'3", weighing somewhere between 250 and 300 pounds. With blue eyes behind distinctive dark plastic-framed glasses, short brown hair, and always his wedding band glinting on his finger. On that day, his attire was typical for the region and his work, a button-down shirt, jeans, and large cowboy boots, the kind that leave a unique imprint in the dust, a signature of the man lost to the wilderness that night. But why did this dependable, grounded man leave in a stranger's vehicle on that night? And what became of him after that moment at Creston Junction? These questions have haunted Sweetwater County ever since. For decades, the mystery of David Richard Williams' disappearance hung in the air like the persistent cold winds that sweep Wyoming's open plains. The initial investigation, conducted by the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office and the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation, quickly focused on the suspicion of foul play. David's track record and character left no room for explanations like a voluntary disappearance or accident. His sudden vanishing, especially with the involvement of the unknown driver, suggested something darker. One early suspect emerged, David Barker Jr., a man from Upton, Wyoming, whose name would become linked to the brown Chevrolet Blazer. Barker Jr.'s connection to the vehicle placed him squarely under law enforcement scrutiny. Yet the specifics of how far the investigation into Barker Jr. went remained shrouded in mystery. Public records offer few details about interviews, forensic examinations, or whether Barker Jr. offered any explanation that clarified his whereabouts or relationship with Williams. What remains clear is that Barker Jr.'s ownership of the Blazer was a pivotal thread in the tapestry of uncertainty. As decades passed, the case cooled into an icy silence. No body was ever found. No definitive trace of David surfaced to offer answers. His family, if any close to him, were left in a limbo of grief clawed at by unanswered questions. The sprawling Wyoming wilderness can conceal secrets for decades, the vast miles of sagebrush, desert, and oil rigs forming both the backdrop and a barrier to discovery. Yet, despite that silence, David Richard Williams' story was not forgotten. It has endured through crucial missing persons databases, the Wyoming Missing Persons website, the Doe Network, the Charley Project, and the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. These repositories, often fueled by dedicated volunteers and law enforcement's commitment to memory, kept alive the hope that someday the shadow hanging over David's fate might lift. Advocates like Desirée Tinoco have worked tirelessly, championing cases like David's to ensure their stories continue to echo and inspire renewed attention. Then, on the chilling anniversary of David's disappearance, November 11, 2023, an astonishing discovery rekindled hope. A hunter named Mark Zancanella was pursuing a bull elk near Wamsutter, Wyoming, deep in a remote part of the Red Desert. After his elk collapsed about 200 yards up a sagebrush draw, he noticed something unnatural, a flash of white. Nearby, half hidden among the rugged brush, lay a human skull, sun-bleached and time-worn. This grim find, miles from the last place David was seen, and on the exact 43rd anniversary of his vanishing, was an eerie coincidence impossible to ignore. Mark did not disturb the site. He immediately reported the find to the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office, demonstrating the care and respect this discovery demanded. Investigators approached the scene with meticulous caution, documenting every detail: the position of the skull, its detachment from the lower jaw found nearby, and notably, the absence of any other human remains or visible trauma to the bones. The skull's place in the middle of nowhere speaks volumes about how easily evidence can be hidden in Wyoming's vast wilderness. The forensic examination began with the work of County Coroner Dale Majhanovich and a state forensic anthropologist. Their preliminary findings described the skull as belonging to a Caucasian male, aged between 25 and 35 years old, remarkably consistent with David Williams' profile at the time of his disappearance. The dental inspection revealed no fillings or cavities, a detail that complicates direct identification through dental records but underscores an urgent need for DNA testing to establish certainty. The skull's condition, cracked and bleached from the relentless sun and wind over decades, suggests it had been exposed to the harsh Wyoming elements for a very long time, possibly since the night David disappeared. Although no immediate signs of trauma appeared on the skull itself, investigators acknowledge this does not rule out homicide, as many causes of death leave no trace on bones. The Wyoming Crime Lab began DNA analysis in early 2024, a process fraught with challenges due to the remains' prolonged environmental exposure. Yet, it remains the critical hope to unlock the truth. With the prospect of modern forensic techniques, including the potential use of forensic genetic genealogy, there lies a real possibility to finally confirm whether these haunting remains are those of David Richard Williams. The convergence of these factors, the skull's location near David's trucking business base in Wamsutter, the alignment with his last known journey south from Creston Junction along Highway 789, and the demographic match, frames a compelling case. Advocates and officials alike view this discovery not as an end but as a vital new beginning. It is a poignant reminder that beneath the endless skies of Wyoming, the land itself keeps silent watch over secrets waiting patiently to be unveiled. As this episode delves deeper into the narrative of that long-ago November night, it invites you to consider the stark beauty and unforgiving nature of the Wyoming wilderness, the very setting that cradled David Richard Williams' final, fateful journey. From the flicker of a last phone call to the chilling discovery over 40 years later, the story beckons us to listen closely, for in the silent shadows of Sweetwater County, a mystery persists, yearning for light and resolution. On the evening of November 11, 1980, the last known chapter of David Richard Williams' life began to unfold at a quiet, weathered service station and bar in Creston Junction, a remote outpost in Sweetwater County, Wyoming. It was here, under the fading light of a cold autumn day, that Williams made his final recorded phone call. His voice, calm and clear, reached his wife with news tinged with routine yet laden with unspoken significance. He explained that he would be late returning home, delayed by the demands of his work inspecting a southern oil rig, a task familiar and ordinary in his life. Yet that day it would be the path from which he would never return. David Williams was no stranger to this rugged landscape, nor to the rhythms of the trucking business that kept the oil fields fed with supplies. His company, Chances Are Trucking, was a small but dependable operation out of Wamsutter, Wyoming, and on that day, like many before, his job would take him through vast, open expanses dotted with rigs and wells scattered across the red desert. The service station at Creston Junction, with its encroaching twilight shadows and the quiet hum of distant machinery, was his last known waypoint. Here he completed his call, projecting confidence as he anticipated the hours ahead. Yet what happened next fractured the steadiness of that ordinary moment into a lingering mystery. Witnesses who were present in the vicinity recalled seeing David Williams not walking away alone, but leaving as a passenger in a brown or tan Chevrolet Blazer. Driving was an unfamiliar white male, unidentified and shadowy in detail, whose presence immediately suggested that Williams' journey was entwined with another's intentions. The vehicle slipped southward along Wyoming Highway 789, vanishing into the long Wyoming night. This seemingly simple observation, the sighting of Williams as a passenger, carries weight far beyond its immediate facts. It implies a connection, a presence of a third party at the critical moment of disappearance. For a man whose character was described as dependable and whose behavior was consistent and predictable, the choice to get into a vehicle driven by a stranger, or at least an unidentified acquaintance, introduces unsettling questions. Was there trust? Was there coercion? Or was something else at play in the final trajectory of his fateful journey? To understand the human amidst the mystery, we must consider the man as he was seen that day. Standing over 6 feet 2 inches tall, A robust figure weighing between 250 and 300 pounds, David Williams carried himself with a presence that bore the tools of his trade and the marks of his life. His clear blue eyes looked out from behind distinctive dark-rimmed prescription glasses, a visual signature that would echo in the memories of those who knew him. On his left hand, a wedding band glinted, a silent emblem of commitments and connections beyond his work life. His clothing was practical and emblematic of his rugged environment: button-down shirt, jeans, and notably, large cowboy boots that spoke to both a fashion and functional sense rooted in the culture of the Wyoming frontier. These details bring into sharp relief the man at the heart of this story, real, tangible, and anchored in a life now disrupted. That evening's picture is poignant not only because of what was seen but also because of what was not. David Williams was not just a trucker making a late call and continuing along a known route. He was a husband who reached out for connection, a worker intertwined with the oil field's relentless pulse, and a figure who walked in familiar boots upon unforgiving terrain from which he would not reemerge. The absence of further contact and his sudden disappearance after climbing into a vehicle driven by an unknown man deepened the sense of unease surrounding his final moments. The brown or tan Chevrolet Blazer itself, an ordinary vehicle now transformed into a vessel of mystery, would become a focal point of the investigation that followed. That a man named David Barker Jr. was later identified as owning such a vehicle added layers of suspicion and complexity, yet the driver's identity at the time remained unclear, shrouding the circumstances in shadows. Was Barker Jr. himself behind the wheel that night? Had the vehicle been lent, stolen, or used without his knowledge? These questions loom large, unanswered, and chilling. In tracing David Williams' last hours, the interplay of detailed eyewitness accounts and the vivid visual markers of his appearance remind us of the human cost beneath the cold facts. This was no anonymous disappearance. It was the vanishing of a man rooted in his community, known by those who could identify his glasses, his wedding band, his towering stature, and the familiar heft of well-worn cowboy boots. These images evoke sympathy and urge us to peer beyond the surface, to seek the deeper truths hidden in the Wyoming darkness of that November night. And so, the story of that final journey stands as both a beacon and a puzzle. It draws us into the remote service station at Creston Junction, the fading phone call, the trailing vehicle cutting south across the expansive prairie, and the silent question of the man who drove into the shadows alongside David Williams. Each detail, carefully recorded and retold, is a thread in the still unfinished tapestry, part both of the man's life and the mystery taking shape in the heart of Wyoming's vast, silent landscape. As we close this chapter of the story, the final journey of David Williams remains a stark reminder of the thin divide between routine and tragedy, between what is known and what remains forever out of reach. His departure from that service station, witnessed by few yet remembered by many, propels us toward the deeper investigation that will follow, the inquiry into those who might have been involved, the search for answers beyond the horizon, and the hope that one day, the silent shadows enveloping that November night might finally yield their secrets. In the early days following the disappearance of David Richard Williams on November 11, 1980, the wheels of justice began to turn under the watchful eye of the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office and the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation. From the outset, investigators were confronted with a perplexing mystery: a reliable, dependable man vanishing without a trace from the remote stretches of Wyoming's sprawling landscape. Williams was not a man to simply disappear. His family, friends, and colleagues knew him well enough to understand that such behavior was completely out of character. This fact alone led authorities to quickly assume that foul play was involved. The circumstances of his disappearance only deepened suspicions. Williams was last seen as a passenger in a brown or tan Chevrolet Blazer, driven by an unidentified white male. This detail was pivotal. It shifted the case from a routine missing person inquiry to one with a strong indication of third-party involvement. The vehicle itself, a seemingly ordinary Chevrolet Blazer, would become a central focus in the nascent investigation, its ownership and movements scrutinized for any whisper of a clue. Among those who emerged as a person of interest was David Barker Jr., a man believed to own that very Blazer. Barker Jr.'s connection to the vehicle placed him directly in the scope of suspicion. Yet, despite this connection, the details surrounding Barker Jr.'s potential involvement remain frustratingly sparse. Public records and reports provide little insight into how thoroughly he was questioned, whether his alibi was vetted, or what information he may have offered to investigators. Nor are there clear accounts of any searches conducted on the Blazer itself, whether forensic evidence was sought or found, or if the vehicle was recovered for examination at all. This lack of detail creates a conspicuous gap in the story, a void that fellow investigators and observers alike find difficult to overlook. The early investigative efforts hint at a complex picture, complicated by the challenges of law enforcement in such a vast and isolated region. Wyoming's sweeping deserts and endless horizons are as much an adversary in criminal investigations as any suspect. The enormity of the terrain meant that gathering witnesses, canvassing for evidence, and conducting searches posed significant logistical problems. With limited resources and the passage of time, key opportunities to collect crucial early evidence may have slipped away. This absence of a full investigative record from the crucial initial hours and days, in particular the methods and extent of interviews, searches, and forensic work, underscores a familiar challenge in cold case investigations nationwide. Often, the initial phase of an investigation holds the most promise for breakthroughs. But when documentation is scant or lost, and when early leads are not pursued or preserved with meticulous care, the whole case can suffer long-term consequences. Vital pieces of a puzzle may simply evaporate into the ether of bureaucratic or human error. For Williams, the dependable nature that initially pointed investigators toward foul play became a double-edged sword. It set expectations for the case. If a man who would always call, always return home, suddenly vanished without word, something terrible had likely occurred. Yet, without detailed investigative archiving, the very foundation of these assumptions rests on incomplete information. Barker Jr. E's role, though front and center as a suspect due to the Chevrolet Blazer, hangs in the narrative like an unconfirmed hypothesis. This investigative gap magnifies the quiet tragedy of the case. Beyond the vehicle link and the early suspicions, no public records shed light on subsequent police interviews, for example, with Barker or with other witnesses who might have seen Williams or the Blazer on that fateful evening. No forensic reports discuss any DNA, fingerprints, fibers, or other evidence collected from the Blazer, which might have been a treasure trove of answers. The scarcity of such foundational documents leaves room only for speculation about what might have been missed or left undone. Listeners should understand that this is not a reflection of investigative negligence, but rather a glimpse into the harsh realities facing law enforcement at the time. Resources and forensic technology available in 1980 were far more limited than today, especially in rural Wyoming. Many cold cases, including Williams, suffer from this historical limitation. They reveal how, without comprehensive and immediate preservation of evidence and witness accounts, years can go by with the truth remaining just out of reach. The early suspicion of foul play, combined with the enigmatic figure of David Barker Jr. and the mysterious Chevrolet Blazer, forms the backbone of the initial investigation. Yet, these threads remain incomplete and frayed, tangled in the vastness of Wyoming's unforgiving landscape and time's relentless march. As this case sits dormant through the decades, it exposes the crucial importance of those early hours in any disappearance, the moments where lives intersect with fate, and where justice must begin its pursuit. In reflecting on this initial investigative phase, we glimpse the broader challenges inherent in cold cases, how missing early opportunities can shadow the entire trajectory of a case, how limited records can cripple future detectives, and how untested suspicions can slip into unresolved mysteries. The wheels of justice turn slowly, sometimes grinding against the weight of lost evidence and lingering questions. And yet, those wheels continue to turn, propelled by hope, determination, and the pursuit of truth. As we move forward in this story, the shadows cast by these early investigations will remain a haunting echo. But the path toward answers is not closed. The unanswered questions about Barker Jr., the Blazer, and the undefined evidence collected, or not collected, around them represent a crucial space in this mystery, waiting still for clarity and resolution. With that in mind, we will next explore the decades that followed, where silence grew and the mystery deepened, as the case of David Richard Williams slipped further into the cold. For more than 4 decades, the disappearance of David Richard Williams has lingered in the shadows, unresolved and deeply painful for those left behind. His story is not just one of a man lost to the vast Wyoming landscape, but of an enduring silence that stretched across generations, an absence that grew heavier with each passing year. David vanished on a cold November evening in 1980, leaving behind unanswered questions and a family suspended in painful limbo. His body was never found. For over 40 years, searches yielded nothing. No clues, no trace, no closure. The mystery was locked away in the archives of local law enforcement and in the hearts of those who knew him, a ghost story whispered in the corridors of Sweetwater County's past. Yet, despite the stoic silence enveloping the case, it never truly faded from memory. It remained a fixture, a name and a date steadfastly preserved on the pages of missing persons registries. Platforms like the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, commonly known as NamUs, the Doe Network, and the Charley Project have played a crucial role in keeping David's story alive. These databases, often curated by tireless volunteers and dedicated law enforcement officers, serve not only as records but as beacons. They ensure that someone, somewhere, might one day stumble upon a clue, recognize a face, or offer a fresh lead. In the vast expanse of rural Wyoming, where the landscape is as unforgiving as it is majestic, such databases are lifelines for cold cases like David's. His profile, age, physical description, circumstances of disappearance remains entered into these systems, open for comparison with unidentified remains or sudden new information. This connectivity across jurisdictions and years bridges the chasm of time, offering hope that technology and collective memory can one day solve what years alone have not. Alongside these technological tools stand the voices of advocates and families who refuse to let the story slip quietly into obscurity. Among them is Desirée Tinoco, the Executive Director of Missing People of Wyoming. Advocates like Desirée tirelessly work to maintain public interest in cases that might otherwise wither away under the weight of time. They understand that each missing person is not a statistic but a story, a life, a network of relationships severed abruptly and left unresolved. Through their efforts, reminders, interviews, and public engagement, they keep a human face on cases like David's, sensitively drawing attention to the ongoing need for answers and justice. The weight of such prolonged uncertainty on families and communities is profound. When a loved one's fate remains unknown, grief becomes compounded by a torment of not knowing. The absence of closure allows hope and despair to intertwine, creating a complex emotional terrain that can be difficult to navigate. This is especially poignant in cases like David's, where the disappearance occurred in a remote and challenging environment, further complicating recovery efforts. Moreover, Sweetwater County's experience isn't unique. The region is marked by several unresolved disappearances, underscoring the broader challenges faced by investigators operating over such a vast and sparsely populated area. As of early 2022, there were 7 unsolved missing persons cases in this county, a number that fluctuated but remained distressingly high. This reality highlights that David's case is part of a larger tapestry of lost and unanswered questions stretching across the rugged Wyoming terrain. Despite the eerie quiet that had settled over the decades, the power of persistence in keeping such cases active cannot be underestimated. The efforts of databases and advocacy groups ensure these stories remain part of the collective consciousness, not relegated to forgotten files but ready to be revisited, reinvestigated, and re-examined as new technologies and new witnesses emerge. It is this persistence that creates the crucial space for potential breakthroughs. Indeed, the yearning for resolution, the unwillingness to accept finality without answers, echoes the profound human need for understanding and justice. In the case of David Richard Williams, even as the years wore on, the long silence was not an end but a pause, an interval preserved by those who refused to let his story be lost to time. The volunteer-run databases and advocacy organizations stand as sentinels against the encroachment of forgetfulness, guarding the memory and the silent hope that someday, the mystery will be unraveled. This decades-long silence was shattered, not broken by deliberate investigation alone, but by a chance encounter, a hunter's discovery in the desolate red desert near Wamsutter that would draw attention anew and reawaken the collective yearning for truth. But before that startling moment, the story was one of quiet endurance, of missing persons data quietly indexing forgotten names, of advocates like Desirée Tinoco patiently carrying the torch through the darkness, ensuring that long-standing missing persons cases like David's were not lost to the abyss. Decades of silence do not mean the end of a story. They are chapters of waiting, of hope held in abeyance. The work of keeping such cases alive, in databases, in community awareness, in advocacy, is crucial for honoring those missing, for supporting families, and for paving the way to future discoveries. As this case moves forward, the importance of these efforts becomes more evident. They are the foundation upon which renewed investigations stand, the unseen force that preserves memory when physical evidence is sparse. Through these layers of remembrance and vigilance, the silent shadows cast by unresolved mysteries begin to lift, making way for possibility and, eventually, for answers. The story of David Richard Williams thus remains active and waiting, a presence quietly sustained by technology, community, and the steadfast commitment of those who refuse to let disappearances fade into oblivion. And with this collective memory kept alive, the hope persists that no case, no matter how old, is ever truly beyond reach. On November 11, 2023, a quiet day in the remote expanse of Wyoming's Red Desert was suddenly disrupted by a startling discovery that would crack open the long-dormant case of David Richard Williams. It was on that very day, exactly 43 years to the date since Williams' mysterious disappearance, that hunter Mark Zancanella's keen eye caught an unassuming flash of light while tracking a bull elk near Wamsutter. That flash was not the glitter of sun on sagebrush but the bright, sun-bleached surface of a human skull, starkly out of place amid the desolate, sprawling wilderness. Imagine the scene: miles and miles of scorched red earth, punctuated only by scattered clumps of scrub, the occasional oil rig silhouetted against a vast, empty sky. This is high desert country, a landscape as harsh as it is beautiful, an area local residents describe as in the middle of nowhere. Such isolation makes it both a refuge and a trap for those who disappear here. For over 4 decades, this sprawling wilderness had kept its secrets close, until fate, through the unlikeliest of events, a hunter's routine pursuit, offered a glimmer of a new chapter in a decades-old mystery. Mark Zancanella's discovery was remarkable not just for its timing but also for his immediate and thoughtful response. Upon spotting the stark white skull lying near where his elk had collapsed, he understood the gravity of the find. Instead of disturbing the sight, he refrained from field dressing his animal, stayed nearby in his truck, and promptly contacted the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office. This cooperation proved vital for preserving the scene for investigators, allowing them to document the precise locations of the skull, the hunter's vehicle, and the elk in relation to one another. In a place where any movement could erode fragile evidence, such careful actions were a small but crucial safeguard for the unfolding investigation. When law enforcement arrived, they found the skull sun-bleached, cracked, and devoid of flesh. The lower jawbone, detached but located nearby, was the only other human remain present. What immediately caught investigators' attention was the absence of any accompanying bones or personal effects in the area. A thorough search yielded no additional skeletal parts, no limbs, no torso fragments, raising difficult questions about the possible dispersal of remains by natural forces or animals over time. The skull, solitary and exposed, was a silent witness in a landscape otherwise empty of human presence. Notably, the skull bore no visible signs of trauma. There were no fractures or damage indicative of blunt force, no marks consistent with gunshot wounds. This fact, while reassuring and excluding direct cranial injury, also deepened the mystery. If foul play occurred, it may have left no visible trace on the skull itself. The cause of death could have involved injuries to soft tissues, poisoning, or other means that leave a skeletal remains intact and unmarked. Forensic anthropologists would later stress that a skull alone, especially devoid of other remains, offers valuable but limited clues. Determining sex, approximate age, and ancestry is possible, but the cause and manner of death often remain elusive without a fuller set of remains or additional evidence. The scene's haunting stillness, surrounded by red earth and the distant rumble of oil rigs, underscored the isolation of this discovery. This was not a place where a casual passerby would stumble upon human remains. The terrain, often described as unforgiving and unforeseen, had cradled this relic of the past for decades, its concealment a tragic testament to time's slow passage in Wyoming's open lands. The Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office swiftly assumed jurisdiction, working closely with Coroner Dale Majchanovich and calling upon the expertise of a state forensic anthropologist. This multidisciplinary approach was essential, marrying field investigation with scientific analysis. The remains were logged meticulously under official case numbers, and the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, NamUs, assigned the identifier UP115209 to the case. These administrative steps, while procedural, laid the foundation for what could become the turning point in a case that had languished in silence. What made this discovery particularly poignant was its eerie synchronicity with the date marking David Richard Williams' disappearance. On the same day, November 11th, 43 years prior, Williams vanished without a trace in this very region. Williams, a 33-year-old trucker from Sweetwater County, was last known to be traveling south from Creston Junction, heading to inspect an oil rig, a routine but crucial part of his livelihood. The landscape around Wamsutter, speckled with oil wells and rigs, was the heart of the industry he served. The skull's proximity to this location hints at a chilling possibility that these remains may be Williams, finally surfacing after decades of unanswered questions. The initial forensic observations supported this unsettling connection. The skull was identified as belonging to a white male approximately between 25 and 35 years old, an age range that aligns perfectly with Williams' age at the time of his disappearance. The undisturbed dental condition, no cavities or fillings, though complicating immediate matches through dental records, was consistent with details known about Williams. However, the absence of definitive trauma meant that further scientific tools would be necessary to confirm identity. The skull, fragile from years of exposure, was sent to the Wyoming Crime Lab in early 2024 for DNA analysis, a painstaking process expected to take significant time due to environmental degradation. The discovery rekindled hope but also underscored the challenge inherent in cold cases, especially in vast, remote regions. The absence of other skeletal remains suggests that any additional evidence or clues might remain undetected in the surrounding wilderness. Yet, every piece of found evidence, especially one as tangible and human as a skull, is a critical step in transforming the unknown into something investigable. The story of the Wamsutter skull serves as a stark reminder of the intersection between chance and perseverance in the search for truth. A hunter's chance observation on an ordinary day unlocked a doorway to decades of silence. It stands as a testament to the harsh realities of Wyoming's rugged terrain, the way it can guard secrets unyieldingly, even as time stretches onward. But it is also a beacon, shining a renewed light on a forgotten face. As investigators awaited the DNA results, the landscape around that lonely skull on the red desert seemed to hold its breath, silent, expansive, and waiting. The hope lingered that this grim discovery might finally bring clarity to the lingering shadows surrounding David Richard Williams' disappearance and offer his family a measure of the peace they have long sought. The Wamsutter skull not only punctuates the story so far but also marks the beginning of a new chapter. From this stark find, the case inches forward, intertwining human memory, forensic science, and the unending quest for answers in a land where silence has, until now, spoken loudest. As we turn a forensic eye toward the mysterious skull discovered near Wamsutter, Wyoming, we enter a realm where the silent language of bone speaks volumes, even after decades of quiet. The skull, found on the exact 43rd anniversary of David Richard Williams' disappearance, has become a focal point for scientists hoping to shed light on one of the region's coldest cases. This is the story of what the remains have revealed, and why they hold such promise and frustration in equal measure. The preliminary examination of the Wamsutter skull, conducted by forensic specialists, determined that the remains belong to a white male, roughly between the ages of 25 and 35 at the time of death. This conclusion aligns strikingly with the profile of David Williams, who was 33 when he vanished in 1980. Yet forensic identification, particularly when limited to partial remains such as a lone skull, is a meticulous and challenging process. One key aspect forensic anthropologists rely on is dental analysis. Teeth carry a wealth of information, often serving as a fingerprint for identification, but the Wamsutter skull presents a complication. Its teeth showed no signs of cavities, no fillings, and no dental work at all. While this might sound like good health, it paradoxically muddies the waters. Without dental restorations to compare against dental records, investigators are left without a straightforward avenue for immediate identification through the usual dental chart matching. This absence of dental interventions turns the spotlight to DNA analysis, a far more definitive but often painstakingly slow process, especially when applied to remains exposed to the elements for over 4 decades. DNA degradation is a real concern. The sun-bleached, cracked nature of the skull attests to its prolonged environmental exposure, facing harsh desert conditions that could severely compromise biological material. Despite these challenges, experts at the Wyoming Crime Lab initiated DNA extraction procedures in early 2024, marking a critical next step in the pursuit of truth. But DNA testing on aged bones is no guarantee of quick answers. The decades-long exposure causes fragmentation and loss of genetic material, increasing the complexity of obtaining a usable profile. Forensic technicians must employ advanced methods to extract viable samples, wading carefully through contamination and decay. This slow and painstaking work underscores a sobering reality. While DNA offers hope, it requires patience, often measured in months or years, to yield conclusive results. The forensic implications stretch beyond DNA and teeth. When only a partial skeleton is recovered, here, a skull with a detached mandible but no other bones, the ability to estimate elements like height, weight, or cause of death is severely limited. Forensic anthropologists can estimate sex, race, and age range based on skull morphology, but many vital clues remain elusive. Without the full skeleton or additional context, pinpointing how the individual met their end, or even confirming identity with absolute certainty, becomes a complex puzzle with many missing pieces. The absence of obvious trauma on the skull itself adds another layer of nuance. No bullet holes, fractures, or blunt force marks were observed, which might seem like a clue in itself. However, the cause of death could just as likely have involved injuries to soft tissues or internal organs, details forever lost once only the skull remains. This lack of skull trauma neither allays suspicions of foul play nor provides definitive evidence otherwise. It simply adds to the forensic ambiguity. This forensic chapter in the saga of the Wamsutter skull paints a portrait of dedicated scientists confronting the limits of their discipline. It showcases the balance between hope and realism, hopeful in the promise of DNA profiling that could finally name the individual, yet ever mindful of environmental and temporal factors that hamper clarity. As we reflect on these intricate forensic insights, we gain a deeper appreciation for the painstaking patience required when the passage of time has been unkind. The skull stands as a silent sentinel in Wyoming's sweeping landscape, a tangible yet frustrating piece of the puzzle. Its story so far is one of partial revelation, a knowledge gap that can only be bridged by the slow march of forensic science. As the investigation progresses, the promise remains that the conclusive identification powered by DNA could finally end decades of uncertainty. For now, the forensic finding both the progress made and the challenges that lie ahead. This moment in the Wamsutter mystery is not a resolution, but a pivotal threshold, one defined by the interplay of science, persistence, and the quiet hope that, even after more than 40 years, the truth will come to light. And with that, we prepare to explore how these forensic clues align with the life and disappearance of David Richard Williams himself, piecing together the shadows that bind this Wyoming cold case. The discovery of a single human skull in the remote vastness of Wyoming's red desert ignited a renewed spark of hope and curiosity in a case long shrouded in silence. On the exact 43rd anniversary of David Richard Williams' disappearance, the skull emerged from a landscape as stark and relentless as the questions it now stirs. Could this solitary remnant belong to the man who vanished without a trace on a cold November night in 1980? Piecing together this grim puzzle demands we examine the circumstantial evidence with care, weighing each detail against the geography, timelines, and forensic findings that beckon us toward an answer. The date of the skull's discovery alone is a haunting coincidence too striking to dismiss lightly. It was unearthed on November 11, 2023. That day marks the anniversary of Williams' disappearance, the day he left Creston Junction for what would become his final, fateful journey. This parallel in timing adds a layer of eerie symmetry, prompting reflection on whether fate or chance led directly to this moment. While such synchronicities can sometimes be purely coincidental, in cases like this they carry profound emotional resonance and often serve as a catalyst for renewed investigative momentum. Beyond the date, the characteristics of the remains themselves stir compelling parallels. Forensic examination established the skull belonged to a white male between the ages of 25 and 35 years at death. Williams, a 33-year-old white male when he vanished, fits precisely within this demographic profile. Dental examination revealed a lack of cavities or fillings, a detail that complicates easy confirmation via dental records but does not contradict the possibility of identity match. The skull itself bore no signs of cranial trauma, offering no immediate clues into the cause or circumstances of death but aligning with a scenario where fatal injury might have occurred elsewhere on the body. The skull's sun-bleached, cracked condition spoke to decades of exposure in an unforgiving environment, consistent with a timeline stretching back over 40 years. Geography provides the third compelling thread weaving Williams and the skull discovery site together. The remains were found near Wamsutter, Wyoming, an area peppered with oil rigs and wells. The very landscape David Williams navigated regularly in his trucking business, chances are. Trucking. On that final night, he had told his wife he was heading south from Creston Junction to inspect an oil rig, traveling a route that plausibly placed him near the skull's recovery location. This intersection of vocational routines and geographic realities is no coincidence to investigators and advocates who have studied the case closely. Desirée Tinoco, a leading voice with Missing People of Wyoming, underscored this alignment, highlighting how the Wamsutter location and the route taken by William resonate closely with the discovery site, applying principles akin to geographic profiling, used in criminal investigations to link individuals to crime or disposal scenes based on their known habits and movements. Yet, while these points collectively create a strong likelihood, authorities maintain a measured perspective. Law enforcement officials emphasized that no definitive conclusion had yet been reached. At the time of discovery, the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office acknowledged evaluating other missing person cases from nearby but found Williams the most plausible match based on age, sex, and location. Other individuals, such as David Vernon Lovely, who disappeared in 1985, were considered but geographically less proximate to the find. The cautious stance reflects the rigorous standards detectives uphold to avoid premature conclusions in cold cases, despite the magnetic pull of circumstantial evidence. Underlying these connections is a profound truth about the nature of unresolved mysteries in vast, rugged landscapes. The red desert, remote and unforgiving, often conceals its secrets well, leading to the possibility that remains can lie undiscovered for decades, scattered by time and the elements. In that light, the skull, even if confirmed as Williams, represents only a piece of the larger narrative still waiting to be told, the story of what befell him, where the rest of his remains lie, and who might be responsible. The investigation into this discovery embodies the crossroads of hope and uncertainty. It involves forensic scientists piecing together biological clues, advocates sustaining the memory and urgency of missing persons cases, and law enforcement walking the delicate line between evidence and speculation. Each fact, the date alignment, the forensic match, and the geographic correlation strengthens the undercurrent of possibility, yet each alone is not enough to seal the case. The convergence of these factors invites us to reflect on the principles guiding such investigations. Geographic profiling, for example, suggests that offenders often operate within familiar territories, and disposal locations may mirror such known patterns. Williams' work and last known movements near oil rigs, coupled with the site's proximity to his trucking base, support such a model. These investigative frameworks, combined with meticulous forensic work and advocacy efforts, form the backbone of attempts to bring resolution after decades of silence. As this story unfolds, the cautious words of law enforcement remind us that identification still hinges on the results of DNA testing, an ongoing process complicated by the skull's long exposure to Wyoming's harsh elements. This final scientific step is crucial, for without it, the identity remains probable, not certain. The outcome will not only provide closure to Williams' family, but will also potentially reopen the path toward justice, transforming the case from a decades-old disappearance to a confirmed homicide inquiry. Thus, as we stand at this juncture in the silent shadows of a long unsolved Wyoming mystery, the puzzle pieces line up with compelling logic, but the picture remains incomplete. The skull's discovery, its forensic profile, and the geography together sketch a haunting outline of David Richard Williams' story. They bring us closer to truth, yet also remind us of the vastness of unknowns still to be resolved. And so, with patient anticipation, the investigation awaits the crucial DNA confirmation, ready to move forward into the next chapter of seeking answers and delivering justice. David Barker Jr., a name that emerges from the shadows of this decades-old mystery, closely linked to the vehicle last seen carrying David Richard Williams into the unforgiving Wyoming night. It is Barker Jr.'s ownership of the brown or tan Chevrolet Blazer that cements his place at the center of suspicion in this case. This vehicle wasn't just a mundane detail, it was the vessel by which Williams vanished, driven by an unidentified white male, ferrying the trucker on a journey that would end in silence. But who is David Barker Jr., and what ties might he have to Williams and this sprawling Wyoming landscape? Barker Jr. hailed from Upton, Wyoming, a detail more significant than it might first appear. Unlike the disappearance site near Creston Junction or the later discovery site near Wamsutter, both in south-central Wyoming, Upton lies far to the northeast of the state. This geographic gap, spanning hundreds of miles, raises immediate questions that gnaw at the investigation's edges. What brought Barker Jr. or his vehicle so far from home? Did he have connections in Sweetwater County's oil fields, or with Williams himself? Or is it possible he wasn't even present when Williams entered the Blazer that night? The records available to the public are sparse on answers. Authorities linked Barker Jr. to the Chevrolet Blazer, and by extension, to the last known moments of Williams, but details about his movements, his relationship to the missing trucker, and any investigative breakthroughs remain frustratingly absent. There is no public record of Barker Jr. being formally interviewed or providing an alibi, and no documented forensic findings from the vehicle itself are available. It's a silence that deepens the fog, highlighting a critical missing strand in the investigative thread. This gap is more than a mere bureaucratic omission. It exposes a fundamental limitation in piecing together the narrative of Williams' disappearance. The massive distance between Barker Jr.'s home and the location where Williams was last seen suggests that the vehicle could have been in unfamiliar hands, possibly loaned, stolen, or driven by Barker Jr. himself undertaking business or personal travel far from his usual surroundings. Without clarity on Barker Jr.'s whereabouts or motives on that fateful night, speculation becomes inevitable but must be tempered with caution. The lack of publicly available investigative follow-up is a stark reminder of the challenges common to cold cases. As time stretches on, memories fade, records are lost or remain sealed, and unanswered questions accumulate. Barker Jr. E's role looms large yet remains enigmatic, a shadow looming over the case but refusing to fully come into the light. Separating fact from conjecture is essential here. Other individuals named David Barker exist in unrelated contexts, such as the David Barker involved in a separate 1970s California murder case, but these should never be conflated. The suspicion surrounding Barker Jr. in this case comes entirely from his connection to the Blazer. Beyond this, there is little to anchor firm conclusions. In the end, David Barker Jr. E's involvement illustrates a significant fracture in the story, the critical unknown about who was really driving that Blazer that night, what relationship they shared with David Williams, and what transpired in the vast Wyoming darkness thereafter. This uncertainty cautions us against premature assumptions. It highlights the need for thorough investigation, transparency, and the painstaking pursuit of truth in the face of a silent, sprawling wilderness that has concealed its secrets for far too long. As the search for answers continues, this shadowed figure beckons investigators to untangle the threads he holds. But until more light is shed on Barker Jr. E's role, his presence remains a stark and unsettling reminder of how incomplete facts can perpetuate mystery. The path forward depends on breaking through this silence, lest the story of David Richard Williams remain forever entwined with unanswered questions in the shadow of suspicion. As we look to the horizon of this enduring mystery, the path forward is marked by hope rooted in scientific advancement and a steadfast commitment to uncovering truth. Central to this next chapter is the critical DNA analysis now underway at the Wyoming Crime Lab, a process both painstaking and pivotal. For over 4 decades, the absence of definitive answers has cast a long shadow over the disappearance of David Richard Williams, leaving a family and community suspended in uncertainty. The discovery of the Wamsutter skull has reignited the investigative efforts, providing a tangible link to a truth that has remained elusive since that cold November night in 1980. The forensic team faces significant challenges. Decades have passed since the remains were exposed to the harsh elements of Wyoming's red desert. The skull, bleached by sun and cracked from the unforgiving environment, embodies the passage of time and nature's relentless effects. Such conditions pose obstacles for extracting viable DNA, testing the limits of modern forensic technology. Yet, breakthroughs in the field have transformed what was once impossible into hopeful possibility. DNA extraction from degraded remains, once a rare miracle, is increasingly within the reach of laboratories equipped with cutting-edge techniques. This scientific progress breathes renewed life into cases long thought unsolvable. The potential avenues for identification are twofold. The first involves matching DNA from the skull to reference samples provided by family members of David Richard Williams. This direct comparison remains the most straightforward approach to confirming identity. In cases where familial DNA is unavailable or inconclusive, forensic genetic genealogy offers an alternative. By analyzing the genetic profile and comparing it against public genealogy databases, investigators can trace familial connections through distant relatives, methodologies that have resolved cold cases globally in recent years. Whichever route proves successful, the confirmation of the remains as David Richard Williams would be a monumental moment, closing a chapter of unknowns that has spanned generations. This anticipated milestone carries profound emotional weight. For Williams' family, confirmation would offer a bittersweet form of closure, ending decades of painful uncertainty about his fate and location. It would transform hollow years of speculation into a tangible understanding, an end to the liminal space where hope and grief have entwined. For law enforcement and investigators, positive identification shifts the focus from a missing person search to a full homicide investigation, sharpening the lens on the circumstances surrounding Williams' death and, critically, on identifying those responsible. The case would no longer be a silent enigma but a quest with renewed direction and momentum. Should the remains indeed be verified as Williams, investigative efforts are expected to intensify markedly. Re-examining the link to David Barker Jr., the last known connection via the Chevrolet Blazer, will be instrumental. Questions surrounding Barker Jr., E's presence far from his northeastern Wyoming home, his association with Williams, and any possible motives or opportunities for harm will ascend as priorities. Investigators would likely revisit archived interviews, scrutinize past leads, and potentially re-interview witnesses or associates who may now speak with the clarity and urgency that comes from confirmed proof of death. The vast landscape around the discovery site might be subjected to renewed searches for additional remains or forensic evidence, hopeful that even after decades, the land might still reveal more pieces of this long-hidden puzzle. Public cooperation will remain indispensable throughout this process. Appeals for information are ongoing, urging anyone with knowledge, even if previously considered minor or unrelated, to come forward. The community's collective memory is a reservoir that might hold the key to unlocking decades of silence. Renewed media attention acts not only as a spotlight on the case, but as an invitation to revisit memories and encourage those who were once hesitant to share what they know. The passage of time does not diminish the value of such information. Sometimes, it is precisely the perspective gained over years that turns a detail into a crucial breakthrough. Throughout this journey, the challenges are undeniable. Memories fade, witnesses pass away, and physical evidence diminishes in value over time. Yet, the perseverance of those involved, from law enforcement agents and forensic scientists to advocates and volunteers, shows that no obstacle is insurmountable when justice remains the goal. The case of David Richard Williams illustrates the power of emerging technology to reconnect severed threads and validate the long-held suspicions surrounding a disappearance that once seemed destined to remain a tragic mystery. In moving forward, the investigation embodies not only a quest for answers but a profound commitment to remembrance and respect. Each step toward resolving this case honors the memory of David Richard Williams and all who have suffered from unresolved loss. It serves as a testament to the enduring human desire for truth and closure, a reminder that even in the shadowed silence of forgotten years, hope persists. As DNA results unfold, and as renewed efforts carry the investigation onward, the story continues, not just as a chapter in law enforcement records, but as a narrative of resilience, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of justice. And so, with cautious optimism, the investigation waits for the science to speak, for the story concealed within those sun-bleached bones to emerge. What answers will be revealed remains to be seen, but the path forward is now clear, through technology, tenacity, and the collective resolve of a community unwilling to let a life disappear without closure. The journey toward justice continues, guided by the hope that after all these years, the silent shadows may finally give way to the light of truth. For over 4 decades, the disappearance of David Richard Williams has remained one of Wyoming's most haunting unresolved mysteries. A man whose life was woven into the rugged landscape of Sweetwater County vanished on a cold November evening in 1980, leaving behind a trail marked only by silence and unanswered questions. The discovery in 2023 of a human skull near Wamsutter, close to where Williams was last known to be traveling, has cast a sobering light on this long-dormant case, a moment filled with both the weight of loss and a rekindling of hope for truth. David Williams was a man tied closely to the oil-rich terrain of Wyoming, a trucker whose work brought him through the vast expanses dotted with rigs and wells. On November 11, 1980, he made a routine call from the small service station and bar in Creston Junction to his wife, explaining that his inspection of a southern oil rig would keep him late. That simple communication became the last clear connection anyone had with him. Seen boarding a vehicle driven by an unknown individual, Williams disappeared into the endless Wyoming landscape, his fate a mystery that would endure without resolution. The years turned into decades of silence. Williams' body was never recovered, no definitive clues surfaced, and the case gradually slipped into the shadows of cold case files. Yet it was never forgotten. His disappearance was cataloged and preserved across missing persons registries, that digital network of hope that holds stories like his in memory and waits for new leads. Advocates tirelessly kept his story alive, reminding the public and law enforcement that beneath the silence lay a man deserving of answers, of justice. Then, on the 43rd anniversary of his disappearance, a hunter named Mark Zancanella made a startling find in the remote red desert near Wamsutter, a sun-bleached skull lying in a sagebrush draw, almost a ghostly echo of the man who had once been there. The coincidence of the discovery date resonated deeply, a poignant reminder of the passage of time and the persistence of unanswered questions. The site, described as the middle of nowhere, highlighted the vast isolation that had concealed these remains for so long. Forensic analysis of the skull brought David Williams' shadowy outline slowly into focus once more. The skull belonged to a white male between 25 and 35 years old, nearly perfectly matching Williams' age at disappearance. The absence of dental work echoed a complexity in identification, underscoring the reliance on ongoing DNA analysis which, while promising, remains a painstaking process complicated by decades of environmental exposure. Yet, Even without a final DNA match, the convergence of forensic, geographic, and circumstantial evidence forms a strong thread connecting these remains to Williams. The road ahead remains challenging. Time has eroded physical evidence and dimmed memories, complicating what must be pieced together from fragments long forgotten. Questions about the circumstances leading to Williams' disappearance endure. Who was the unidentified driver last seen with him? What truths have lain buried beneath the dust and sagebrush? And if the skull is confirmed as his, how will investigators unravel a story interrupted over 40 years ago? Law enforcement agencies hold fast in their commitment, balancing cautious procedural rigor with the urgency felt by those who seek resolution. Advocates and the public remain vital, their vigilance keeping the case from fading into oblivion. Every detail, every recollection, and every new piece of evidence becomes a step toward justice, not just for David Williams, but for the countless others whose stories linger unfinished. The case of David Richard Williams stands as a somber testament to the silent shadows cast by unsolved mysteries. It underscores the enduring need for perseverance in the pursuit of truth, no matter how much time has passed. As this chapter of the investigation remains open, listeners are invited to hold the story of David Williams close, not only as a record of loss, but as a beacon for hope and remembrance. In the quiet spaces where cases grow cold, the echoes persist, awaiting the moment when resolution will finally break through the darkness.